My guest today is simply one of America's best journalists. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist. He is now at Rochester Institute of Technology. He was on faculty at Syracuse University of Law for 15 years. He taught at USC and UCLA. He's the co-founder of the DCReport.org, which is an awesome nonprofit ad-free news service, which you should support and subscribe to. And he's the author of 4 bestsellers and 4 other books, former staff writer at the New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, Los Angeles Times, Detroit Free Press, and at age 19, he is at the San Jose Mercury. I talked with David K. Johnston about a whole bunch of issues, what to look for during the transition, how Trump is going to try to pretend he did things that he didn't do and do things and pretend he didn't, and so much more. This guy is one of the best. I hope you like our conversation. Now with the legend, David K. Johnston, who is not retiring. You could easily have gone off into retirement, could have gone relaxed. You've done it all. You've accomplished it all. But, sir, we need you now more than ever. Welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me and the kind words, Pete.
I mean that, for many reasons. You can talk about policy, so many different policies, but you can also talk about journalism and law and all of it. What are you focused on right now? Just a general question. What are you most focused on right now? What kind of issues are you looking at during this transition to Trump and to another 4 years of this man you know so well as anyone?
For the next 10 days, I'm focused on grading papers of my students at Rochester Institute of Technology. But once I get through that, we need to pay very close attention to what's about to happen here. On Sunday, yesterday, Donald Trump told Kirsten Welker on NBC's Meet the Press that the members of Congress on the January 6th committee that led to his second impeachment should be jailed. And this tells you how Trump thinks. He does not have any understanding of the rule of law. He really believes he's special. And of course, I've known Donald for 36 years. I wrote in 1988 about the prospect that he would become president of the United States. People thought I was nuts back then. But this is unlike anything we've ever had. And unlike the first Trump term, Pete, where Trump didn't expect to win, didn't have a team of any consequence, and is himself an incompetent, utterly incompetent manager. And that's what being president really is. It's a management job. Put time into this, don't put time into that. Give up on this, you're not going to win it. Focus on that, you have a chance of winning it. Donald now has a dedicated team of ideologues, and they are people whose own public statements establish they do not believe in equality, they do not believe in democracy. They believe in rule by the rich, special treatment for folks who have white skin like you and me, white skin privilege, as we used to call it, and an utter disregard for the Constitution. And if you don't take my word for it, take Mitt Romney's. Mitt Romney said, millions of members of my party, he's a Republican, millions of members of the Republican Party don't believe in democracy and our Constitution.
Right. How much are you looking to history and historians who have covered the rise of authoritarians and how autocracy works? Because they need to, he needs to, and the media that supports him needs to destroy the truth. That's my understanding.
Right. The core of any autocratic regime is control of information. Solzhenitsyn, the great physicist who was one of the opponents in the final days of the old Soviet Union, once said, and I'll probably bollocks this a little, about the Kremlin, we know they're lying. They know we know they're lying. We know they know we know they're lying. And what you want to achieve is you can't trust anything. And Trump has been very successful at this. He's persuaded a lot of people that anything he said by anyone critical of him is a lie. He is the sole source of truth. He has promoted this idea that he is a godlike figure. He has called himself your savior. I alone can save you. And many people, not everybody in America, thank goodness, but many people no longer pay any attention to the news whatsoever. It just came out last week that in those counties, and there are about 3,300 county or county-like jurisdictions in America, in those counties without a newspaper, Trump won 80 to 90% or more of the vote.
Wow.
that just screams about how important it is to have information. Now, I'm afraid that the Washington Press Corps is not up to this. After all, their job has been to cover politics within the well-understood realms of differences between Democrats and Republicans. What you have now in the White House is a convicted felon, a man who believes that he is special. He has said, for example, that as a Christian, he has never once asked God for forgiveness because he's never done a single thing in his life requiring forgiveness. Yeah. So the press corps, I think, is going to be very challenged to cover what he does. And they also need to understand the way Donald speaks in code. So Kirsten Welker of NBC asked Donald, if you think these members of the January 6th committee, Liz Cheney and the others, should be jailed, are you going to tell the FBI and the Justice Department to go after them? And he said, well, that's up to them. Yeah, they listened to him. He's pointed them because they're loyalists. And she just let that slide. She didn't come back and say, given that you pick people who are completely loyal to you, don't you think they'll get the message from what you just said that you want these people pursued?
It's such a good point about how he communicates this as well as anybody. He's always communicated this way, thus to not have necessarily a paper trail or a way to prove that he gave that order. But the people he appoints know exactly what he's expecting. You've seen this over and over with him. So we're going to have...
And the people he's appointing this time are not going to be people like Marine General Kelly, who was his chief of staff, the one who had to explain to him why there is a memorial over the USS Arizona in Pearl Harbor. How you can grow up in America and not know about a date that will live in infamy and what the Japanese did on December 7th, including their screw up in not telling us in advance as they intended but failed to do, it is just beyond me. But it goes to Donald's appalling ignorance. Donald also said last week, we shouldn't be involved in Syria because we have nothing to do with it. What that tells you is he doesn't know anything about geopolitics. He doesn't have a clue to why Syria is important to the national security of this country, to your safety, to the people watching this, and to my safety.
How closely are you paying attention to what's happening or what is going to happen at the different agencies and departments? You've written all about this. You've covered many of these different federal agencies, how they work, why they do or don't work. So we could take, for example, any that you've written about, obviously the IRS, but you could look at EPA, you could look at SEC. I'm sure David K. Johnston is thinking a lot about what is going to happen when, again, they put the wolves in charge of the hen house, when they put industry leaders and captains in charge of regulating their own industries.
My best friend David Crook and I started dcreport.org, which is completely free. It has no ads. It depends entirely on donations. At the beginning of the first Trump administration, because we felt that the Washington Press Corps they'd cover the politics of things, but they weren't going to get into what they were going to do to the government. And Trump did a lot of damage in his first term. The second book in my Trump trilogy, It's Even Worse Than You Think, documents things like a guy whose personnel jacket is just the most flawless personnel jacket you could have, who is turned into a $148,000 a year clerk because he wouldn't bow down to Trump's people. So the Environmental Protection Agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Food and Drug Administration, all of these are crucial to your economic and personal welfare. So who's in charge of the FDA? Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who thinks that vaccines are harmful. Right. It's just complete nuttiness, and people will die over this. They want to create, just as we have a strategic reserve of petroleum and gold, this administration is talking about creating a Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency reserve. Now, why you would spend real tax dollars to buy fake money is beyond belief. It just doesn't make any sense. But if they do that, it's going to have major repercussions. And my favorite example, Pete, is Trump's tariff issue. So imagine for a moment, Pete, instead of being one of the best comedians I've ever known, that you had gone into the car business and you made Pete cars and you sold them wholesale for $10,000 each and you made $1,000 profit on every car. Nice business. Trump comes along and says, I'm going to put a 60% tariff on Chinese cars that compete with Pete cars. The dealers for Chinese cars are going to have to raise their price, and they will, to $16,000. You're going to raise your price too as a domestic manufacturer. You're going to raise it to probably $15,000 because now you're going to make $6,000 profit on each car you sell, not $1,000. You're going to sell more cars than the Chinese because you're underpricing them, even though you're close to them. And even if your car sales fall by half, you're going to make 3 times as much money. Donald Trump's tariff plan is a scheme to take money out of the pockets of the working class people who voted for him because he said he was their economic savior. It's a scheme to pick their pockets and further enrich his fellow billionaires. And only one, and I emphasize the word one, national journalist or economist besides me has said what I just told you. And that's David Wessel. He used to be at the Wall Street Journal, and then only in passing on NPR. There should be big page one stories, nightly news reports that Donald Trump's tariff scheme will raise domestic prices. But of course, a lot of the people who write about economics, just like every other subject, are generalists. They don't know economics. They don't know how tariffs really work, and they're beholden to their sources. And so they tell you what their sources tell them, and they're accurate about that, but they don't have a theoretical or principle level knowledge of what they report about.
Right, which is why I love reading your work and people like Dean Baker, who writes Beat the Press on economic reporting, right, and other economists, which are really important.
And Dean is an avowed liberal, but I'll tell you the important thing about Dean, he pays attention to the basic principles in economics. Things like something called accounting identities that are always true. An accounting identity is something that's just 2 + 2 = 4 as long as you're in base 10. And he's very careful to make sure he sticks to well-established points. And then he's terrific at telling you, here's how dumb this policy is. Here's how bad the reporting was in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal on this or that issue or the New York Times. He's really an important source of understanding economic news in America.
And on that note, I love Dean. I have him on all the time. I'll get him back soon, maybe this week. When you look at, you were just talking about the tariffs effect on the economy, and the other ideas that Trump certainly has been talking about and posing are this mass deportation and a tax cut. Given the state of the economy right now, you can characterize what you think of the economy is right now, David, but it would seem that those 3 policies would have such a detrimental effect on the economy. Tariffs, deporting the people who are doing so much of the very, very important work, and of course, another tax cut for people who don't need it.
Well, and let me just give an example of the kind of ancillary issues that aren't being discussed. If we deport large numbers of people who are in the country without permission or with partial permission, the price of food will go up. If they start raiding slaughterhouses, which are owned 90% of the pork, beef, and chicken is a handful of companies, the prices of those are going to go up. You have to tend crops year round, not just harvest them. Price of food will go up. So it's, I think, terribly important to set a baseline with people, to make them understand how well we're doing. The American economy right now is booming. Donald Trump has, they said Sunday, we had the best economy ever. We absolutely did not. In a DC report, we documented this, that he had sub-average performance, subpar performance for the whole post-World War II era. And each year he was in office, the economy grew at a slower rate, which is not the trend line you want to have. Donald has persuaded people they're in terrible shape. And people blame Biden for things that he has nothing to do with. A good example is the price of eggs went up for a while after the COVID lockdowns ended. It came back down to below where it was under Donald Trump when you adjust for inflation. And then it soared back up. Right now, eggs are pretty expensive. Why? Because avian flu got into these huge industrial laying hen operations, and we had to kill 100 million laying hens. Right. There are only 384 million laying hens before that. So more than a quarter of these birds were killed. Of course, your price of eggs is going to go up, and Joe Biden has nothing to do with it, nor does Donald Trump. But Trump is masterful at blaming people for things they didn't do and diverting people from accountability for things they did do if they're his friends.
And of course, taking credit for just about anything he wants and dismissing blame for just about anything he wants. And somehow he gets away with it, which is what makes it also maddening. Before I let you go, I do want to ask you for your reaction from any angle to the murder in cold blood of the CEO of a health insurance company. You've also written plenty about healthcare economics and so on. Then the interesting thing about it is the reaction about how people not only don't care, they're literally rooting for an assassin. And that, of course, is as a reflection of how insidious our health insurance industry is. What do you want to say in reaction to the state of healthcare and what, if anything, is going to change under a Trump administration with Republicans in the lead?
Yeah, Pete, I think this assassination also reflects the Trumpian influence of disregard for the rule of law. And that this happened, I am not surprised. There have been too many cases over too many years of insurance companies denying care on what I think are unreasonable grounds. In my book, Free Lunch, I quote Dr. Linda Pino, a Kentucky physician, who testified under oath before Congress that every time she killed a patient by denying health care, such as a heart transplant, she got a bonus. They literally paid bonuses to her to kill people. And this didn't catch on with the public. Instead, the public discussion was, oh, if we have Medicare for all, there'll be government death squads. No, we have corporate death squads. And this company in particular, United Health, which insures about 1 in 5 Americans, and of those who have insurance, therefore, it's an even bigger number, closer to 1 in 4. But they have become incredibly tough in recent years on 2 fronts. One is just denying a care, saying you don't need that, or your doctor's wrong, or your doctor's choice of this prescription medicine for you, we're not going to give you that. You're going to have to take this other medicine until you can prove it doesn't work and you're sicker. And then secondly, tying people up with paperwork until they give up. I saw an interview the other day with some people who lost their house. They eventually got paid, not in full, but substantially paid by United Health. But they delayed for so many years, these people lost their home. This is a totally superfluous business. There is no reason, Pete, to have health insurance. So, and let me give you one number I hope people watching this keep in their minds about how wasteful the American non-system sick care system is. We don't have a healthcare system. We have a non-system sick care system.
Right.
The French have, according to every medical sociology study I've seen, and I've used the French healthcare system and have friends who have, is the best in the world. It is better than ours. The Germans is just essentially equal. It's a different system, but it's almost equal. If we spent the same share of our economy on healthcare as the French and the Germans, we could have everybody covered. We only have 90% covered and really only 70 because a lot of people have crummy health insurance. People would be seen quicker by doctors. Our health status as a society would be better. And we would save 6.1% of GDP. That's a meaningless number. Does that number mean a thing to you, 6.1% of GDP?
I mean, it does because I've studied
It's a big number. It's a big number, but can you visualize that in your head? I can't, and I work with these every day. Here's how to make that number meaningful. 6.1% of GDP is all the income taxes paid by everyone in America who makes less than $50,000 a month or $600,000 a year or more. And we have people in this country, remember, who have multi-billion dollar annual incomes, but through tax shelters, both legal and illegal, avoid paying any taxes. But all else being equal, as the economists like to say, if we adopted the French healthcare system, no one would go bankrupt, no one would lose their home, everyone would get the care they need, and you wouldn't pay income taxes until your income reached $600,000 a year. That's what it's costing us to maintain this system. And Donald has signaled that what they're likely to do, if they can get the votes, is repeal the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and then have nothing to replace it. And
We'll see if-
people will die if they do that. Lots of people.
Yeah,
One of my sons will die because he's an entrepreneur. He owns a small business. He won't be able to get any health care because he's had stents, and he'll die.
Yes, people with pre-existing conditions or go bankrupt. By the way, I saw this statistic shared by Judd Legum, who I'm sure the collective net worth of America's richest 12 men is now over $2 trillion. The bottom 50% of Americans have a collective net worth of $3.82 trillion. Wow.
I don't think the bottom 50% have that much. That sounds very high to me. The concentrated wealth at the top is beyond all reason. Unless you're a deal maker like Carl Icahn, there's no value. There's no what economists call marginal utility in these fortunes. Unless you gamble it away, you cannot spend an income of billions of dollars a year. And we should be taxing those at a very high level. And we're not. Because of this ideology that it's all for the rich. Bill Gates said the other day that if America had what he called a proper tax system, his fortune would be one size the third it is. But one size the third it is, he'd still have 50 billion.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I do have to ask you, you mentioned how we could save money on healthcare by having a different system, obviously. What do you make of this Department of Government Efficiency being run by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, who have no idea what they're doing and they're con artists? Right. You, however, do understand how the federal government works, the budget works. You understand about fraud and waste, fraud, and abuse, and realize that it gets big headlines, but it's really not that much, even if you cut all the waste, fraud, and abuse. And by the way, if you deregulate the agencies who are supposed to find the fraudulent people, the SEC, the IRS, and EPA, you're going to find even less fraud because the people are supposed to be looking for it. So what do you make of this government efficiency? It sounds great. It sounds really great. DOGE, the Government Efficiency Agency.
First of all, there is no department. This is just a fiction. It's Donald Trump's life is a fiction. He creates his own reality, and he lives in this fictional world in his head, and a lot of people have decided they want to live in that same fictional world. There is no department. I don't believe Congress will create such a department. These are two guys who will, however, have Donald Trump's ear. And Donald has appointed loyalists at places like the Office of Management and Budget. Now, in the case of Elon Musk, he has $13 billion of contracts with the taxpayers. In the modern era, behind many great fortunes lies taxpayer money. And he's going to be in charge now of efficiency and waste and regulation. If you're Boeing, you should watch out because Boeing competes with Elon Musk in space matters. And you can bet your bottom dollar that Musk is going to do his best to harass his competitor through this fictional DOGE agency. There isn't the kind of money that people think is out there to be had. We do not buy $600 toilet seats in the military. That's covering up black box projects like when they built stealth jet bombers and jet fighters and hiding the money. Every military quartermaster, every sergeant who's the quartermaster somewhere will tell you he doesn't have enough money to do all the things they want him to do, despite this enormous amount of money we spent. What are you going to do? Cut the FBI. Okay, the FBI has two parts. One is to protect us in national security. That's going to be under very big assault from the Trumpers. And the other is criminal activity in the U.S. You want to cut the FBI, do it, but understand that what you're doing is helping criminals, terrorists, and hostile foreign nations. You want to cut the FDA. Okay, that means you're going to have more people get food poisoning, get drugs that are dangerous, and people are going to die. It's not like we take the tax dollars you pay, put it on a garbage scow, go out in the Atlantic Ocean and dump it. That money is spent and it recirculates through the economy. And all wealthy nations, look around the world, there's plenty of data on the internet you can find. All wealthy nations have high taxes. Why? Because private wealth creation depends on public investments. If you're in the hotel business, if you're old man Conrad Hilton, he wrote in his will about how building roads and airports was what made him rich because people traveled and they needed hotels.
Right.
And if you stop spending money on this, then you're going not to have the same level of prosperity in the country. The real issues we need to be working on are people who are paid way too little money. If pay had kept up with productivity, the median wage of about $43,000. Remember, half of Americans make less than $43,000 a year. They'd be making somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000.
Right.
And we wouldn't have all this economic distress. But the Trump plan, what did Donald say? He said many times, wages are too high. How people think he's the champion of working people when he says wages are too high is indicative of the poor level of critical thinking skills in America, the poor level of sophistication about politics in America compared to other countries. And so, Pete, I watch very carefully. I do think the Democrats, while they should make noise, should basically let Trump be Trump. LTBT, let Trump be Trump, LTBT, because if he does what he says he's going to do, it will tank the economy, it will lead to people dying. And if the news about that gets out and the Democrats do a good job in Congress in their minority position, if the news media covers these things, people will hopefully wake up and go, oh, wait a minute, the good old days were during the Biden administration, which they were vastly better than during Trump.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. Let Trump be Trump. Love it. David K. Johnston, we are going to need you more than ever before. Keep up the good work, and I hope that you'll be able to check in with me again real soon.
Absolutely, Pete, and go make some people laugh.
We
need it.
On it.